d'annoncer des benchmarks très impressionnants sans jamais trop ouvrir d'accès à leur modèle, mais cette fois-ci, on a de nombreuses démos qui viennent de différents comptes. Une question assez légitime se pose maintenant, est-ce qu'un modèle d'une telle précision est créable par une simple startup? La réponse est oui, c'est possible. Sora utilise des approches entre guillemets classiques et le rendu époustouflant de Sora est possible via l'immense capacité d'entraînement que possède OpenAI. Donc malgré que les startups chinoises soient limitées en termes d'achat de GPU, avec une architecture innovante et une quantité assez importante de GPU, c'est tout à fait possible. Justement, côté architecture, le modèle utilise, je cite, un système d'attention spatio-temporelle en 3D pour simuler des mouvements complexes et des interactions physiques qui imitent mieux le monde réel. Donc ça a l'air d'être très intéressant comme approche, même si on a très peu de détails. En tout cas, un système d'attention complexe peut être très intéressant quand on génère une vidéo d'un paysage par exemple. Si le modèle s'embête à essayer de générer chaque fois qu'il bouge, impossible d'avoir un résultat exploitable. D'après les nombreux tests que vous voyez depuis le début de la vidéo et que je vais vous présenter, on peut sans trop d'hésitation affirmer qu'OpenAI Sora a été dépassé. Le seul potentiel red flag, c'est la résolution des générations. La qualité de l'image est parfois limitée. Avant-dernier point, avant les démos, comment accéder au modèle? Un numéro chinois est nécessaire et il faut prévoir environ un jour d'attente pour être accepté à la bêta. Et dernier point, je vous conseille à la fin de ma vidéo d'aller regarder la vidéo de Thibaut Neveu, Sora. La génération vidéo par IA est décevante. Voici la solution. Première démo, on est sur un mini trailer style Mad Max. Les 4 premières séquences sont très réalistes, limite trop réalistes, mais la vue drone nous permet de détecter de nombreux détails qui confirment que c'est une vidéo générée via de l'IA et les dernières séquences sont également assez incroyables. Ensuite, on a un chat
I have fallen into the trap of thinking that when it comes to training, pushing harder at a higher intensity gives you more bang for your buck. If you want to improve, you've got to train hard. Short on time? Just train harder. Do all the high intensity stuff and cut out the rest. Right? Wrong. As many of you will already have so far. And if you keep pushing, you'll end up sore and tired and slow. And that was me. Even after all these years, I fell into that trap again. So a friend very casually suggested that I read up on the work of Dr. Inigo San Millan, who's a specialist in physiology and metabolism in health and disease based at the University of Colorado's Medical School. He's also the coach of Tadej Pogacar and the head of performance at UAE Team Emirates. He believes that the benefits of lower intensity exercise are huge, essential even, not just to performance, but to health and well-being, to life in general, in fact. I'm delighted to say that Dr. Sam Millan was able to join us for a video interview, and all of us here at GCN were so interested by what he had to say, we've left the interview almost in its entirety for you to watch as well. Inigo, thank you so much for fitting us in to your schedule. Where in the world are you at the moment?
Well, thank you very much, Simon. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me in this interview. I appreciate it. I'm now in Colorado, trying to wrap up the season and at the same time keep up with my academic activities. So trying to balance things out.
So I've been confessing to the GCN viewers that I've fallen into that trap that I think a lot of us make, where I prioritized high intensity training and I got into a bit of a rut. I certainly didn't get fit. I got very slow and tired. So can you explain how riding slower fundamentally can make you faster?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, exactly. You're totally right. It's a concept that has been going on for many years because intuitively, right, we tend to train harder and do a lot of intervals and sprints because this is where we win races. Or people win races. I haven't won races forever, right? But anyways, that's where people win races in the high intensity, right? So intuitively, people train there. The problem is like cycling and in general, sports or muscle bioenergetics don't work that way. Of course, you win the races at a high intensity pace, but for that, you need to have a very good, solid, like aerobic base, to put it that way, and lactate clearance capacity. So one of the things that happens is that at high intensity, you use a lot of glucose for exercise, for energy purposes. Now, always, every time you use glucose, you produce lactate, right? And you don't use fat. At high intensities, you use 0 grams of fat. per minute, right? So that means that, you need to be more effective, metabolically speaking. So one of the key things is to clear lactate. So the way to clear lactate is to develop the slow twitch muscle fibers better, which are the ones that clear lactate. Lactate is produced in the fast twitch muscle fibers, which are the ones that you deploy when you do high intensity exercises like the competition or training, high intensity. But that lactate from the fast twitch muscle fiber has to travel to the adjacent muscle fiber, the slow twitch, in mitochondria of those slow twitch, and there be utilized for energy purposes. For that, it's key to develop those slow twitch muscle fibers, that they're going to be the recipients, right, of that lactate. If you don't develop those muscle fibers, lactate keeps building up. So this is why the lower intensities are key, because those slow twitch muscle fibers are the assistants to these fast twitch muscle fibers, and the best way to develop them is to specifically stimulate those through training, right? And for that, the lower intensity, that's where you're going to be deploying these muscle fibers, as opposed to just training at high intensities. You keep stimulating those fast twitch muscle fibers, right? They become very efficient. And what is called very glycolytic. They use the glucose very efficiently, the turbo. The turbo works really well, but then you need to clear the lactate.
So I guess if for people that have got power meters, they'll be sort of familiar with their zones. But is there any way of helping someone work out what is a high intensity effort and what correspondingly is a lower intensity effort? What does it feel like? The
best way obviously is to do a metabolic test in the laboratory, or even you can do a field test. And then for that, I use lactate a lot. It's a great surrogate to see mitochondrial function and whether you're using fat or carbohydrates, and calculate intensities really well. If you don't have access to this, it's not as easy, but I would say that going by the feelings, it's going to be very accurate, more accurate than 220 minus your age and those formulas for heart rate, or even an FTP. FTPs, many times they fail quite a bit in the sense that they're not might be very accurate to calculate your zone 2 out of an FTP, right? Because it's a fixed percentage, it might be off, right? Because when you want to calculate a zone 2, when we talk about lower intensities, we don't talk about just a ride in the park, right? If you ask, world-class athletes or some of the top cyclists that I coach, like Pogacar, Ayuso, Almeida, right? Their zone 2 is they go at it, right? It's not a ride in the park, right? But for someone who's maybe not as developed, might be lower intensity. Everybody's different, right? But the way I put it is like, if you can maintain a conversation like you and I are doing now on the bike, you're definitely doing zone 1. Okay. Right? If it's difficult to maintain the conversation, but you can keep up with that, you might be around that zone 2. If you have a hard time, like really difficult to maintain the conversation, you're already entering in more of the glycolytic pathways. This old school thing of the talking test, it works really well.
How much zone 2 training should you do then? And I appreciate that's probably a difficult question, because what Pogacar does and what an ordinary person would do would be very different. But maybe as a proportion of your total riding in a week, how much should you devote to it?
I would say that minimum to improve, those adaptations, you need 3 days a week. 2 days you maintain. But if you need to improve, you need 3 days a week. So sometimes even 4. So between 3 to 4 ideally. But again, it depends on which time of the season and which block. And also as the season gets closer and closer, or the races get closer and closer, you need to, and you have done a very good a block of zone 2, for example, you definitely need to also stimulate high intensity, because at the end of the day, as we said from the very beginning, right, that's where you win the races. When people tell me, all you do is zone 2, like, no, ask my riders when they do the zone 4 training rides, right? It is really hard also, because they're very high intensity glycolytic workouts where you stimulate those pathways.
And what about for like a weekend warrior? So someone like myself, I'm looking at turning 40 next year. I was fit. I'm sort of holding on to it, but I'm a time crunch cyclist. I'm your typical time poor cyclist. So if you've only got 5 hours a week, that's where it feels like, riding along in zone 2 doesn't feel as constructive.
It might not seem that constructive, but one thing that for weekend warriors, right? You don't need 4 or 5 hours of zone 2. So that's where I see, that doing like 3 to 4 days a week, zone 2 works really well. So let's say that you have 4 days a week to train, so you can do 3 days a week, zone 2, and even if you have an hour and a half or an hour and 15 minutes, and towards the end, you can do some high intensity. And going back to what a lot of people think is like, oh, I only have an hour and a half to train each day, so I'm going to go boom 100% at it. Yeah, you might see like a fast but not super high improvement, but you're going to plateau. And eventually you're going to deteriorate, because of what we were saying, you develop the glycolytic fibers very well. So that turbo wow looks really good, but eventually you're not supporting, you're not developing the other fibers.
But it's really good to know, actually, that you don't need loads of time in order to be able to feel the benefits and still get the fun ride in at the weekend. I was also really interested to hear you say that you can do a bit of high intensity at the end of your zone 2 rides. And that's another place where I've kind of been a little bit unsure as to how best to do that. So, for example, if I go out and ride, I can stick in zone 2, but it's always tempting to just get out the saddle and, put another 150 watts on the pedals to get over a little rise or accelerating away from a stop sign or some traffic lights. Is that detrimental to your zone 2 training?
That's a great question. Yeah, if it's like a little hill, obviously don't get off the bike and walk, right? Because, my heart rate is this or my power output. You can do that, right? But try not to do it, not go over or not get into your lactate threshold or going over it. Because once you engage those energy systems, right, you start producing a lot of lactate, you start producing a lot of what's called catecholamines, and the whole hormonal, right, and metabolic response is altered. So it might take you a good 30 minutes to go back to a baseline, or 20 minutes, right? So that you can kind of stabilize again. So it's like a shock to the system.
Are there any shortcuts here? Like if you do, fasted training, for example, or if you set off and you say rode at a slightly higher intensity, to stress your muscles in a different way and then settle back into zone 2 and you get through that 30-minute period where your body's readjusting. Are there any ways you can effectively get more out of the time you've got?
From my experience, it's important to stick to all those basics. I know fasting is a big deal. It's been a big deal.